أعوذ بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وسرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلاله كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن عليه السلام قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت وعليك السلام يا قرة عيني وسمرات فؤادي. فقال يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء. فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جده يا رسول الله أتعزن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوزي قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه. فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وسمرات فؤادي. فقال لي يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأن رائحة جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم إني جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جده السماء. السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله أتعزن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهم تحت الكساء. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأن رائحة أخي وابن أمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا سيدي وخليفتي وصاحب لواء قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بزعتي قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء خزع بي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومى بيدي أيمنا إلا السماء وقال هم إنه آلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وهامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يعلمني ما يعلمهم ويحزني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عادهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم. فأجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماوتي إني عما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمس مزيعة ولا فلكا يدور ولا يجرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذي نحن تحت الكساء. فقال المين جبرائيل يا ربي ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت نبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبلوها وبنوها. فقال جبرائيل يا ربي أتأذن لي أن أحبط إلى الأرض لا يكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط المين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي العل، يقرئك السلام ويحزك بالتحيات والأكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مزية ولا فلكا يدور ولا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لعجلكم ومحبتكم، وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم، فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا آمين وحي الله، فإنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء. فقال أبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. فقال علي لا أبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبنا إلا ونزلت عليهم رحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلا أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي عليه السلام أذن والله فزنا وفزا شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال أبي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبنا وفيهم محموم إلا وفرج الله همه ولا منعوم إلا وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي عليه السلام إذنا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فزوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة رب الكعبة. اللهم صل على
نام ابا سے وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے، نام ابا سے وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے، اس میں اعظم ہے یہ مومن کی التجا کے لیے، نام ابا سے وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے، نام ابا سے وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے، کوئی مانے یا نہ مانے ہے یہ ایمان میرا، چشمہ فیض ہے یہ در ہر ایک عطا کے لیے. چشمہ فیض ہے یہ در ہر ایک عطا کے لیے. نام عباس وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. نام عباس وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. دید کرتا عالم پر تو سانس کرتا ہے. دید کرتا ہو عالم پر تو سانس رکھتا ہے. یاد اجتا ہے یہ غازی مجھے یوں لگتا ہے. اب بھی روتا ہے یہ زینب تیری رضا کے لیے. اب بھی روتا ہے یہ زینب تیری رضا کے لیے. نام عباس وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. نام عباس سے وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. ثانی وقت کا ہے در قرار علی بن علی. ثانی جعفر تیار ہے غیرات کا ولی. کچھ نہ کہا لیکے اکبر نے یہ وفا کے لیے. کچھ نہ کہا لیکے اکبر نے یہ وفا کے لیے. نام عباس وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. نام عباس وسیلہ ہے ہر دعا کے لیے. اس میں اعظم ہے یہ مومن کی التجا کے لیے.
صلی علی محمد وآل محمد صلوات. With the dim light of the crescent moon, the new year unfurls insidiously like black clouds of monsoon, casting shadows of doom and gloom, thick shades of black that drape the earth, withering and bleeding as the wind brings images, a severed arm, a pierced throat, a headless body. Oh my Abbas, oh my Ali Asghar, oh my Hussein, dripping black blood like black gold that energizes the rusty dead soul, the black garb of night, the void of color and pleasure, hides the vibrant colors of the truth, pure and unattained, only to be seen with the spirit of the eye, the spirit of the seeker seeking the truth, truth in its gleaming armor, faces the black beast and the Yazids and the blackened hearts of the Qabils, the blinding blackness of ignorance. The rare black arose from the desert, gives up its precious petals to the winds, the fragrance drifting in the valleys and hills of time, the scent of the tuba tree, the scent of Yusuf's shirt, the scent of the poetry of Ali, and the heavenly scent of the pure divine beings. The banner falls with the loud crash, but the words like seeds scatter far and wide. The black fertile earth brings forth a celebrating green of hope. Truth after all can never die. محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
صلوات. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین. ارے چلتے نو کے سے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر. چلتے نو کے سے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر. ارے گھٹنیوں کے بل میں تیری لاش تک آئی حسین. ارے بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. ارے پھر کسی مشکل میں گھر کر میں نہ گھبرائی حسین. ارے کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. ارے کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. ارے بھولنے بیٹھی تو کس کس کی نا یاد آئی حسین. بہہ رہے تھے آنکھ سے آنسو تیری رخصت کے وقت. بہہ رہے تھے آنکھ سے آنسو تیری رخصت کے وقت. ارے پھر کوئی آنسو نہ ٹپکا آنکھ پتھرائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. صلوات.
آواز بلند صلوات. بارے دیگر صلوات. MashaAllah, Mason did so well. I'm not sure if I can do the same. I'll just try my best. تھوڑے سے فضائل, اس کے بعد چند شعر مصائب کے. میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی میں کرتا رہوں گا ثنا پنجتن کی. میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی میں کرتا رہوں گا ثنا پنجتن کی. میں اور میری حقیقت ہی کیا ہے خدا کر رہا ہے ثنا پنجتن کی. میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی. صلوات پڑھ دیجیے. دکھاؤ ہمیں وہ عبادت کہاں ہے عبادات کی جو کہ روح رواں ہے. دکھاؤ ہمیں وہ عبادت کہاں ہے عبادات کی جو کہ روح رواں ہے. یہ بے جان روزے نمازیں تو لائے کہاں بھولے آئے ولا پنجتن کی. ایک مرتبہ صلوات پڑھتی ہوں. جبھی تو حرم کو پیغمبر نے روکا کہ ہو بعد میرے کسی کو نہ دھوکا. جبھی تو حرم کو پیغمبر نے روکا کہ ہو بعد میرے کسی کو نہ دھوکا. کبھی اور کوئی نہ آئے گا اس میں کہ مخصوص ہے یہ قصہ پنجتن کی. میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی میں کرتا رہوں گا ثنا پنجتن کی. او آدم و حوا کے نالائق لڑکے تو آلے پیغمبر کو ناراض کر کے. او آدم و حوا کے نالائق لڑکے تو آلے پیغمبر کو ناراض کر کے کہاں سے خدا کی رضا ڈھونڈتا ہے خدا کی رضا ہے رضا پنجتن کی. میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی. ایک مرتبہ صلوات پڑھ دیجیے. بس مصائب کے دو بند. کریں کیوں نہ ہم روز و شب آہوزاری جو بے رحم ظالم نے چادر اتاری، کریں کیوں نہ ہم روز و شب آہوزاری، جو بے رحم ظالم نے چادر اتاری، وہ زینب اکیلی کے سر سے نہ اتری، لٹی کربلا میں ردا پنجتن کی، میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی، عزادار ہوں میں شہ کربلا کا، ہے غم مجھ کو بنتے علی کی ردا کا، عزادار ہوں میں شہ کربلا کا، ہے غم مجھ کو بنتے علی کی ردا کا، ہم پہ جو گزری سو گزری ہے لیکن، رباب اور لیلا کا غم کھا گیا ہے، میرے جسم میں جان جب تک رہے گی، میں کرتا رہوں گا ثنا پنجتن کی۔ باواز من صلوات۔ باواز بلند صلوات۔ دیگر صلوات۔ کتنی بلندیوں پہ ہے ایوان فاطمہ، کتنی بلندیوں پہ ہے ایوان فاطمہ، روح الامین ہے صورت دربان فاطمہ، حاصل کہاں دماغ کو عرفان فاطمہ، خلد بری ہے نقشہ امکان فاطمہ، کچھ اس لیے بھی مجھ کو تلاوت کا شوق ہے، قرآن ہے لفظ لفظ ثنا خوان فاطمہ، نبیوں پہ حکم ہے کہ نگہ روبرو رہے، توحید حشر میں ہے نگہبان فاطمہ، اس کو مٹا سکیں گی نہ باطل کی سازشیں، اس کو مٹا سکیں گی نہ باطل کی سازشیں، اسلام پر ہے سایہ دامان فاطمہ، کرتے پھریں زمین پہ تجارت بہشت کی، کرتے پھریں زمین پہ تجارت بہشت کی، اپنے گداگروں پہ ہے فیضان فاطمہ، اور ہر نقش پا میں جذب ہے فتح مبین کی مہر، دیکھے مباہلہ میں کوئی شان فاطمہ، اور ختم رسل کی گود میں عصمت کی جائے نماز، چہرہ علی ولی کا ہے قرآن فاطمہ، مفہوم ما تشا کی قسم کائنات میں، فرمان کردگار ہے فرمان فاطمہ، اور وہ کل بھی پنجتن میں صدارت مقام تھی، وہ کل بھی پنجتن میں صدارت مقام تھی، منصب یہی ہے آج بھی شایان فاطمہ، اس انتظار میں ہے قیامت رکی ہوئی، اس انتظار میں ہے قیامت رکی ہوئی، ایمان کل ہے شاہد ایمان فاطمہ، اور شاید ابھی اس انتظار میں ہے قیامت رکی ہوئی، شاید ابھی کچھ اور ہو فرمان فاطمہ، کیسے کروں تمیز حسن اور حسین میں، کیسے کروں تمیز حسن اور حسین میں، ایک روح فاطمہ ہے تو ایک جان فاطمہ، اور رومال فرق حر ہے گواہی اس امر کی، بخشش کی سلسبیل ہے احسان فاطمہ، اور باب بطول ہو کے در خیمہ حسین، باب بطول ہو کہ در خیمہ حسین، ہر دور میں لٹا سرو سمان فاطمہ۔ میں سوچتا ہوں لکھ دوں وفاق نصاب میں، فضا کا نام شمع شبستان فاطمہ، ایک مرثیہ ہے خون شہیداں کی بوند بوند، ایک مرثیہ ہے خون شہیداں کی بوند بوند، بکھرا ہوا ہے ریت پہ دیوان فاطمہ، اور نیزے کی نوک پر ہے مجھے رحل کا گماں، اس پر سر حسین ہے قرآن فاطمہ، دیکھ اے مزاج مسخ ناطق کی برہمی، شعلوں کی زد میں ہے سورہ رحمان فاطمہ، اور فوج ستم کے سامنے کب ہے علی کلال، فوج ستم کے سامنے کب ہے علی کلال، شک کے مقابلے میں ہے ایکان فاطمہ، اور اولاد فاطمہ نہ ہوں دین پر نثار کیوں، اولاد فاطمہ نہ ہوں دین پہ نثار کیوں، نقصان دی ہے اصل میں نقصان فاطمہ۔ صلوات۔
Jazakallah September. I would request Maulana Bilal Hussain to please recite tonight's majlis. Ek nare salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Ek buland tareen salawat.
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. One more Fatiha for tonight's sponsors and the marhumin of all those who are present. Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم وقرآنه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الأخلاء يومئذ بعضهم لبعض عدو إلا المتقين. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa. And your loudest salawat to hasten the master of our time, Sahibul Asri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب آل محمد. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Again tonight, inshallah, we'll split our discussion into two parts. The first part pertaining to some ahkam, some rules, some explanations of important matters. And our second half, inshallah, will be on the topic of discussion for tonight. In the first part of our discussion yesterday, we began by mentioning some points about the wasiyah, which brings us to something that's an associated conversation about the affairs at the end of life and how we can assist someone who's in the end phases of their life. Now, it happens that unfortunately, when we witness someone who is on the verge of passing away, this condition of someone who is in the state of death is called ihtidar. That's one who is waiting for death. They are in the state of waiting of this death to come, is called ihtidar. This condition, for example, at times can be something that's very difficult for us to witness, and it can be something very problematic, and we have many desires to assist the person any which way that we can. Sometimes, for example, Western medicine has of the opinion that don't let someone suffer. Don't put them in a condition of suffering. However, in Islam, suffering is not the measure of whether this person's life is worthy of continuing or not. We know that the condition of death itself, our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, explained to say that death is the expiation of the sins that allows the right of heaven. So meaning when we look at the process of death that happens to an individual, we shouldn't look at it, for example, that this is a material issue that this person is going through, but rather that this experience of death is something that will, inshallah, lead this person, that will remove their sins in this world and allow them to go to heaven. Which points to one of the questions, that conversations that come up, is the belief that an easy death is a sign of iman and a difficult death is a sign of kufr. But the matter isn't so easy actually. Why? Because the same way this hadith of the Prophet explains to us that some mu'mineen, for them death is made difficult, that they have some sins that they have to account for, that Allah wants to remove from them in this world, so that when they come to akhirah there is nothing but reward for them. And that there are certain people who are sinners, who Allah wants to give them the good that they earned in this life, so that when they come to the hereafter, the only thing they have is punishment. So we can't look at the death of a person and make an assumption that, oh, he had an easy death, he must have been a pious person. No. But rather we recognize and we understand that this death is Allah's way of measuring and weighing, and He gives a person whatever that person needs to attain the full benefit or full punishment that Allah has planned for them. But when we look at somebody who's in the phases of death and is in this condition of death called ihtidar, there are some things that we should do for them to assist them through this process. First and foremost, if someone is in the condition of what we call the pangs of death, ihtidar, that they're preparing for death, that their death is about to come, one of the recommendations is to lay them with their feet facing Qibla. Now, in the riwayat, typically it mentions lay them facing Qibla. And some question comes that how should this be done? And the explanation our ulama and our maraja have done is that facing Qibla means that the person is laid in such a way that if they sat up, their face would be to Qibla. When we see a mu'min in this condition that their life is about to end, we prepare them by putting them in the direction of facing Qibla. Now, facing Qibla itself can be a challenging situation. Why? Because the same way that it's mustahab to be facing Qibla at the time of death, it is haram to be facing Qibla at other points in time. One of the important things that we know from our fiqh is that a person, we cannot have a toilet, a restroom, where the toilet faces or has the back to the direction of Qibla. This action is haram. So now when you take a look at a person who's in the condition of about to being able to pass away, if they don't have control of their bowels in that situation, you have to pay attention that you don't leave them facing Qibla, because in the direction of doing something mustahab, you've now forced them to do something haram. And we always ask Allah, it's an important dua. This is actually a very important dua, to ask Allah for a good death. May Allah give us all khatma ala al-khair, inshallah. But this idea of a good death has many different facets. That, for example, when we die, we don't have control over ourselves anymore. That we die in a condition of respect and dignity. That we can die in a condition that has ita'at of Allah. But there are people that Allah, when He gives them a test, He gives them a difficult test. That, for example, there are some people, there's a story told of one alim who was on the verge of death, and they kept putting him in the direction of Qibla, but he couldn't control his bowels, so he kept turning away from Qibla. So he himself is turning away, and they're turning him to Qibla, and he's in this condition. It's a very difficult state to be in. So it can be very problematic, but it's something that if we want to do a kindness to someone, we pay attention to these factors and we assist them by facing Qibla. Another one of the things that's recommended is that especially if a person is having difficulty passing away, or if they're in pain in the process of death, that it's recommended take them to the place where they used to pray and place them in their musalla of prayer, and it will facilitate the process of death. Now again, these a'mal, these ahkam are all interrelated. So we see that, for example, the example of discussion about the rules of the bathroom applies to the moment of death. Another aspect of this, the idea that there should be a place in my house that is designated for prayer, is associated with my death, which speaks to an important value that one of the ulama of Najaf used to share with me very often. He says, I ask you that when you have the time, speak to the mu'mineen in the West and give them my message. So I'll share with you. May Allah protect this Sayyid. He says, listen, in the West I've noticed, when I look at the houses of the people in the West, they're very lovely. In the house they have a place for TV, they have a place for internet, they have office, they have all of these different places that they've designated in their house. He says, ensure that the same way that the mu'mineen have places of enjoyment in their house, that they have a place dedicated for their prayer in their house. That we as believers should honor the fact that our Islam is worthy of having a place designated in our house where we go to pray, and we have a place that's dedicated to this act of worship in our house. And it becomes a benefit. If I have this place in my house, at the end of my life, it's one of the things that will facilitate this process of death for me. Now there are many different, and this door is very big, but again, we're mentioning a few things that are beneficial to a person. Amongst the things that are beneficial, that if I want to aid a person, it's the recitation of the kalima, the recitation of the talqeen, the reminder of my shahadat of faith. When we look at the talqeen, typically this is something that's recited in the qabristan, that before we bury a person, we prepare them that after your death, Munkar and Nakir will come and will ask you, what is your book, who is your Lord, what is your Qibla, who is your Prophet, who is your Imam, and we give them the answers. So as to say that this moment is a difficult moment, maybe in this moment it would be hard for you to remember these questions, so let me prepare you for them. The same concept applies, that what we do for the person who is on the verge of death, that the remember of all of these points that are associated with the philosophy of my faith, that I review them with this person. Other things that are beneficial, along with remembering the kalima, remembering, for example, the book of Allah, the recitation of the Quran, the recitation of various du'as. Now, there are some, and not in a bad way, but what they do is they'll put on a tape, and we'll play the tape. That, okay, the Quran is playing next to them. Yes, this is beneficial, but this is maybe a quarter of the factor of benefit of the person sitting next to this individual reciting the Quran himself. That if we want to do this, we should try and recite the Quran ourselves next to this person. If we can't recite the Quran, then we have the dhikr of Allah. One of the important factors is in that time of death, we don't bring material and worldly affairs to the conversation around this person. What did they do about their will? What's going to happen to their business? How will their children survive? That person in that moment of death and in that time of death is going through a difficulty that not only is it that we are sitting there, but there are other interested parties of that soul who are present at that moment. Not just us. And when we distract this individual from the focus at hand, it gives other interested parties an opportunity to influence this individual. There are examples where the ulama have explained that at the time of death, both the malaika, the angels, come to assist the person, and shaitan comes to distract the person. Shaitan's interest in that moment is that for somehow to keep this person busy in material affairs and forget Allah. Because if he remembers the dunya and he's interested in the dunya, he's not thinking about Allah at all, which is why even ulama say that one alim, he writes the experience, he says, I was in such a state that I thought I was going to die, and I was in this pain of condition of death, and I thought that this sickness was going to kill me. He says, in that moment, the only thing that kept coming to my mind is Fulan bin Fulan owes me 200 dinar. And I kept worrying about this 200 dinar and how am I going to get it. And something kept reminding me every time my mind would go to Allah, it brought me back to my 200 dinar. That the only thing I wanted to say and the only thing I wanted to talk about is this money that somebody owed me. And I felt as if someone was promising me that if you remind them of this 200 dinar, you'll get the benefit, it'll come to you. This is the attraction that shaitan has, that if we want to in that moment when someone's in difficulty, don't have worldly discussions around them. Separate these worldly discussions from that individual and only focus on Allah and focus on remembering Allah and staying attached to the message of Allah. The other thing we mentioned is that the malaika are present. The malaika are present for the mu'mineen to facilitate this process. That's a very difficult process to go through. And one of the things that we do to ensure that we don't disturb and we don't keep these malaika away is that if someone is in a condition of death or in the condition of proximity to death, don't approach them in a state of impurity. There are narrations that say to us that, for example, a person who comes to an individual who is in a state of janabat, who has to do ghusl, and he comes to a person in the state of death, that the malaika leave this individual and don't go near him. Because they say, this filth has come, we don't want to be here. Now, it's permissible to be in this state. There's nothing wrong with it as long as I don't have anything wajib upon me to be in a state of janabat. But my spiritual state can affect those around me. So I should be conscious to pay attention that if this has a negative effect on the person around me, I'm not in this condition at that point in time. And that we stay in a state of purity. If we can do wudu, it's even better. Come in a state of wudu by a person who's dying. When we go to the hospital to visit someone, we know someone is sick. Be in as much purity as possible. That my impurity or my spirituality doesn't have a negative effect on the needs of this person in this state. So these are some points that we pay attention to that we can do for an individual, whether it's, for example, by preparing them and laying them in the direction facing Qibla, the recitation of Quran around them. If we can't recite Quran, the frequency of recitation of salawat around them, the reminder of the talqeen and the reminder of the kalima shahada. These things are important for a person because in that final moment, shaitan makes his greatest play. His goal at that moment is you spent a life of worshipping Allah, but at the moment of your death, can I take you away from Allah? This is perfect play. That in your life, you have the opportunity to do istighfar. You can do tawbah. I can seek Allah's forgiveness after I committed a sin. But if shaitan gets you at the last minute, that your last moments are those associated with kufr, you died, you lived a life of faith, but you died on kufr. Na'udhu billah. So that's a very difficult time and we should pay attention to. We want to help this individual, but it's important to know how we can help them, and these are some of the points that we can pay attention to. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our second discussion for tonight is associated with the topic of friendship and the importance of friendship. Inshallah, we'll have three discussions. One about the role that Allah has placed or this religion has placed on friendship. Two, the bad type of friendship. And inshallah, three, the good type of friendship. First and foremost, it's important to understand that the idea of friendship in the religion of Islam is very, very important. To the point where the Ahlul Bayt in many narrations have explained to us that even when we take a look at, for example, not only from our Prophet, but from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala friendship is a basic necessity. It's a basic necessity, and one who has denied it has certainly lost something important in his life. The idea of friendship in the religion of Islam is even associated with how Islam spread and grew. Had it not been for our Prophet emphasizing this friendship, it's possible that the beauty of the religion of Islam may never have reached us. How? When we look back at the history, you guys are okay? We're going to have a little history lesson. Okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When our Prophet left the city of Mecca and he came to the city of Medina, there were two classes of individuals in the religion of Islam. There were those who were the Ansar, the helpers, who were those who lived in the city of Medina and had resources, had houses, had businesses. Though they didn't live, they weren't very wealthy people, but they had something. And the other were the Muhajir, those who left their houses in Mecca and came to the city of Medina. Now in those days, it wasn't that, for example, you have a bank account and everything transfers from one branch to another, you go, everything is there, and yallah, bismillah, alhamdulillah. No, these were people who literally their entire investment and value in life was in their house, was in their business, was in this property that they possessed in Mecca. And when they left the city of Mecca, that business, that house, that everything that they possessed was gone. So you had a group of people who were in complete abject poverty, nothing. And you had people who were stable and comfortable in their life. And the Prophet had these two classes of individuals, and he had to build a society out of the two of them. And this is where the beauty of how our Prophet built relationships amongst each other was so important for establishing and saving the religion of Islam. First and foremost, we take a look, when we look back at the event, our Prophet enters into the city of Medina, he's on his camel, and the people are reciting poetry, and they're happy, and they're pleased, and the famous poetry, Tala al-Badru alayna, is very famous of this event. And people, when our Prophet entered into the city of Medina, were those who tried to take him to their house. They grabbed the reins of the camel and said, come to our house, come to our house. And Rasulullah, because he wanted to demonstrate that preference wouldn't be given by what the people could do. The people, if you can try and force, if I can be rough with you, but hey, at least I got the Prophet to my house. Who cares what I did to you? The Prophet came to my house. So the Prophet, first and foremost, he intelligently says, don't do anything, this camel knows where to go. And where this camel takes me is the place that I will stay in, not anywhere else. And this camel takes him to the house of a person by the name of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Now this is the most famous thing, that he goes to the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, but there were other things that happened too. Don't imagine that everybody in Medina was happy about the coming of Rasulullah. There were those people who were upset, meaning there were factions already present in Medina that were arguing and debating, how are we going to break this religion? How are we going to stop the influence of this person in our society? Famously, one of the events that happens, there was a person by the name of Abdullah ibn Ubay. Abdullah ibn Ubay was someone who couldn't even hide his animosity to the Prophet. That when the camel of the Prophet started to go through the city of Medina, this Abdullah ibn Ubay stood at the door of his house and the door of his neighborhood, of his relatives, and said, go away from here, we don't want you here. Go to someone else, why did you have to come here? The people were following this camel, hoping that it would come to their house, and Abdullah ibn Ubay was the one who was standing at his door. He couldn't even hide his animosity. That I don't want this man here, I don't want him here. Eventually Allah afflicted these houses that didn't even want the Prophet in them with something the equivalent of termites that destroyed their houses, and they themselves had to seek shelter in the houses of others because of their animosity to the Holy Prophet. Eventually, this camel stopped at the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, his name is Khalid ibn Zayd. In the books of history, if you want to read his biography, you would look for Khalid ibn Zayd. Some places they haven't. Anyway, that's a different conversation. Sorry, I apologize. I get carried away sometimes in this. There are miracles that are associated with this house of Abu Ayyub, that our Prophet was setting an example of the type of person he wanted the mu'min to be by this Abu Ayyub. Abu Ayyub's house that he stopped at had 2 stories, a ground floor and a higher floor, first floor, like a second floor. And when Rasulullah says, Abu Ayyub, I will stay with you, Abu Ayyub says, Ya Rasulullah, I would be pleased if you would take the higher level. I can't imagine that I should be above you even in this house and sleeping. Rasulullah replies that, oh Abu Ayyub, it is more appropriate, you and your mother live in this house, both of you stay in the upstairs, so that if guests come to see me, they don't disturb you. And he puts Abu Ayyub and his mother on the top, and he sleeps on the bottom, and guests come and go from the house. And this Abu Ayyub was someone who had love for the Prophet and did a lot of care for him. There are 2 examples that come, that one, for example, Abu Ayyub and his mother would try to be very careful never to disturb the Prophet. At one point in time, that some water fell, and in those days it wasn't the way floors are today, that when this water fell, in fear that it should not disturb the Prophet, they had one piece of cloth. This cloth was expensive. They used it to dry the water, and they found that immediately Allah had dried even the cloth and protected them from this difficulty. Another instance, that Abu Ayyub had a small sheep. He had his mother make bread, and he slaughtered the sheep, and he prepared food and presented it before the Prophet. And the Prophet said, why don't you invite the people to come? And Abu Ayyub went out into the street and said, oh people, come, the Prophet has invited you to dinner. And he served, it was a small sheep, small animal, but it fed so many people. Hundreds of people came to the house of the Prophet, that the Prophet invited us. And they all ate from this food, and it never decreased. And at the end of the meal, it said that the Prophet said, bring the bones of this animal. And they placed the bones next to of the animal there, and Rasulullah prayed, and the animal came back to life, to show that Rasulullah is one who can provide for the people, and still Allah will continue to give life to those things. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This phase of society was a very basic phase of now where the Prophet has to join these people together. And the thing that he uses to join these people together is he says, O Ansar and O Muhajir, I will make from you brothers. And I will join you in pairing, and I will pair each of you together. The focus of this pairing and building of this friendship and this bond of brotherhood was that this disparity in society should not break the foundation of Islam. That the haves and the have-nots should not come to fight in animosity in such a way that there would be nothing left of Islam except the poverty-stricken people and those who had resources. That Rasulullah made a brotherhood between these two, such that he said that even the Muhajir can inherit from the Ansar. and the Ansar can inherit from the Muhajir, to show the importance of this relationship. Eventually, this was, once the society had established, Allah then removed this hukum, and they were allowed then to go back, and inheritance was put back in the family, that it's not that a friend can inherit from a friend, but the fundamental of the idea that Islam survived was because of the promotion of this friendship and brotherhood that our Prophet used to go and to bring society together. A very important fundamental. Therefore, when we look at the narrations that tell us about the importance of friendship, and friendship is a fundamental of life, is a tool that Allah is telling you that had it not been for this friendship, this society might have broken. Therefore, understand that if Allah can protect the society of Muslimin through friendship, O mu'mineen, take advantage of this tool, it will be beneficial to you. But now on the other side, which brings us to our second point, is that the same concept of friendship, Allah explains in the Quran. He says, Al-akhilla yawma idhin ba'duhum li ba'dhin adu illa al-muttaqeen. Allah says in the Quran that these friends of yours, on that day, on the day of judgment, they will be enemies of one another, except the muttaqeen, except the pious ones. In the tafsir of explaining how is it that this friendship that's an important concept now suddenly becomes your enemy on the day of judgment, comes the statement tafsir al-Burhan of our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our sixth Imam explains, he says, on the day of judgment, any friend that you have made in your life, that is a friend based on any relationship other than the love of Allah, will be your enemy. Any friend, whether you've, and we know, living in this society, we make friends of all colors and types of people. But that all of these friendships on the day of judgment will be your enemy. Therefore, be careful of these friendships. Be careful of who you make as your friend. Now, understanding why would these people who in my life, they did me no harm. They were kind to me. They built relationships with me. They built associations with me. They helped me in my business. They helped me with my family. They helped me in all of my responsibilities. There's nothing wrong with having these friendships. The mention of this is to explain that certain friendships, even though they may be beneficial in life, can possibly have a danger of animosity to you in akhirah. And the significance of that is that the day of judgment is a day where every person will be needy, every person will be in difficulty, and will look to take advantage of anything that they can to protect themselves from the fire of hell. Except for those who are pious and who have certainty that Allah is going to reward them, not punish them. One who has a relationship with a person for the sake of Allah, on that day he has nothing to fear from this person, because both of them are looking for the blessings of Allah in their life. We'll explain this in a moment. Let's talk about this bad friend idea. Now, the idea that we say that all of these people who are our friends, other than those who are friends for the sake of Allah, will be our enemy on the day of judgment, they will be looking to take something from us, is not to say that these are bad relationships to have, that don't have these relationships. That no, and when our children go to school, for example, when we go to work, that it's wrong for us to associate with our coworkers. No, Joe, George, Jorge, whoever you are, I can't be your friend. You're going to be my enemy someday. He's going to look at you and say, Baba, all I wanted to do is see if you wanted to have a cup of coffee. I asked to borrow a pencil. I'm not your enemy. Sorry, do you want a pencil from me? No. The fact of this statement is to warn us of the gradient and the scale and the relationship that we should give to each of our friends and how much right they have over us. Now, before we get into this, there's an example to understand how they'll be our enemy on the day of judgment. If you have some time, everybody's good? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, this example comes from a different door of knowledge, but we see the impact of the greed and the necessity of the day of judgment on this. There's a description that says that, for example, there was a young man who came from India to Najaf to study. And when he came to study, in those days, in the old days, you would bring your wealth with you for your expenses, and this child came from a wealthy family. He had his resources. He brought an amount of wealth with him to the city of Najaf to pay for his expenses and to be able to study. While he was studying in Najaf, a letter came that his father is very ill in India and for him to come back. Now, in those days, you wouldn't take your wealth with you back and forth because there was a fear of robbers. So now he looks for a person to leave his wealth with that will be protective and it'll be secure. So he asks the students, he asks the people in the town, and they say that this Fulan bin Fulan shopkeeper is a very reliable person. Leave your wealth with him. He's the most trustworthy person in our area. People go to him to seek counsel and advice. This will be a good person for you. He says, okay, goes to the shopkeeper. He says, can I leave some wealth with you? I have to travel. When I come back, I'd like my wealth to be safe here. Shopkeeper says, no problem, leaves the wealth and goes. Now, when he hands the shopkeeper the wealth, it happens to be a large sum of money. And the shopkeeper, I'd imagine, the student, what would he have? A few dollars? It's okay, he can leave it with me, no big deal. But then when he sees the wealth, he becomes greedy. He loses his good intention. He says, I'm going to keep this. The student goes, he goes to India, he comes back. And again, when you travel, you don't take much with you for the sake of the fear of being robbed. So all of his wealth is with the shopkeeper. He goes to the shopkeeper and he says, can I have the amana that I deposited with you, can I have it back? Shopkeeper says, I have nothing. Go away. I've never seen you before in my life. Child, now think about it. He's a foreigner in the foreign land. He has no relationships. He went to the most trustworthy person. He has nothing. Now he's worried. What do I do? He tries asking him again. He tries asking, and the guy just says, no, I don't know you. I've never seen you before. Get out of here. Eventually, this child, he goes to the haram of Imam Ali and he pleads with him. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I came to your city. I came to study with you and these people are abusing me. Help me. In that night, he sees a dream of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and Imam Ali says, the first person to enter the city tomorrow morning, ask them for assistance, they'll help you. Boy wakes up, very excited, goes to the door of the city, because in those days the city had a gate. They open the gate, and an old man who sells firewood was the first person to walk into the city. And this child, he says, maybe I misunderstood. How could this old man who sells firewood, meaning he has nothing in his life, he's a simple man. That guy is the most respected shopkeeper in the city. How could he help him? So he doesn't ask him for help. Second night, he has the same dream. Again, Imam Ali tells him, ask the first person. Again, he goes to the door of the city. Again, this is an old man who sells firewood. He says, what can this old man do for me? Third day, he has the same dream. Third day, he goes to the door again. Door opens, the first man who comes inside. Old man selling firewood. And now finally the old man asks him, do you want something? I see you here every morning. Young boy tells him, he says, listen, I've been having this dream that I'm supposed to ask the first person who comes into the city for help, but I can't imagine you have the ability to help me. He says, what's your problem? The boy explains the situation and everything that happened. The old man says, I know that shop, and I know that after namaz-e-zuhr, he holds, for example, a gathering of people who come and ask him advice and sit and discuss with him. Come to his shop at that time, I'll get you your money. He says, okay. They go to the shopkeeper's place after namaz-e-zuhr, and the shopkeeper is listening to people's problems and giving them advice. And this old man turns to the shopkeeper and he says, oh, shopkeeper, I need your assistance in an affair. Shopkeeper says, go ahead. What can I help you with, old man? The old man says, I have a problem. He says, years ago, when I used to live in Fulan bin Fulan village, I needed to take a loan. And my child was sick and I needed money for medicine, and the only person who could give me the loan was a Jewish man in the city. So I took a loan from him, and because even then I sold wood, I didn't make much money, I agreed to pay him back, for example, the equivalent of $1 a week. And he gave me the loan. Alhamdulillah, my child got better, everything worked out, and I started repaying him. And it took me a while, but I would pay him $1 a week every week, until eventually there was one payment left. And this Jewish man moved away from the city, and I couldn't find him. So I never paid him that $1. Some time ago, in my dream, the old man is saying, I had a dream, and it was the day of judgment. And loving Imam Ali alayhi salam, I passed all of the phases of the day of judgment until I got to the sirat, that once you cross, you go into heaven. He says, and then I started crossing the sirat. And sirat, the bridge that we have to cross, passes over the fires of hell. This old man says, as I passed over the sirat, I got stopped. And somebody from the fires of hell was calling to the angels that stopped this man, and they stopped me. And this being from the fire of hell said, I am matloob, I am someone who is owed from this individual, I want to collect my debt. In that moment, I thought, who could I owe anything to? I don't owe anyone anything. But when I looked closer, it was that Jewish man who was burning in the fire of hell. And he complained, and he says that this man owes me $1. Obviously, it wasn't $1. There weren't dollars back then, but you understand, a small amount of money. And I want to collect my wealth from him. So old man says, in that moment, I complained. I said, I looked for him. I tried to find him. I couldn't find him. How could I pay him his money? He wasn't around. And the Jewish man says, I don't care what you did. Right now, you owe me, and I want to collect. And the angel said, he has a right. You have to pay him. This is the day of justice. How can it be that you can get the bounty of Allah when someone has not received their justice? So this old man says, in that moment, I said, I don't have anything. I've gone through my questioning. I've done everything I need to. My affairs are settled. There is nothing left I have possessed that I can give him in this moment. The Jewish man says, I don't want wealth from you now. He says, now I am burning in the fires of hell. My body is literally on fire by a flame that is hotter than anything the world could imagine. He says, you have the coolness of the mercy of Allah on you. Let me just touch you with one finger that I can attain the coolness from your body. And he says, I didn't want to do this, but the angel said that it's his right, you have to pay him. So he approached me with one finger in my dream, and he touched that one finger to my chest. I woke up screaming from the amount of pain I felt of his one finger that touched me on my chest. Now, much similar to you, all of the people were quiet, and the shopkeeper says, old man, why did you come to me? What do you want from me for this dream? The old man says, I want to ask you, is there any cure for the wound on my body from the touch of that finger? He says, you have this wound? He says, yes. He began to undo the bandages on his chest, this old man, and the smell from the wound was nauseating for the people who were present. And the shopkeeper was forced to say, I have no cure for this wound. I have no way. I don't know of anything that could possibly help you. The old man says, thank you, and he leaves. The shopkeeper turns to the boy. He says, come tomorrow, I'll give you your money back. Meaning Amir al-Mu'mineen picked the right wasila to help him. The significance in the context, one is the idea, if we were to look at the morals of the story, is be careful of an amana, of a trust. Anything that you take from someone, repay it in dunya that you don't have to repay it in akhirah. The other aspect is take a look and see that in that situation on the day of judgment, people will be so desperate to avoid any aspect, even for a second, the punishment of Allah that Allah Himself describes. There is no relief. There is no one you can call once this punishment overcomes you that will separate you from my azab. That when Allah is telling us, be careful, that friends on that day will be enemies of one another. Take this statement seriously. That anything a person can use on that day of judgment, they will use it. They will try and use it to save themselves from the fire of hell. Which is why, when we talk about the idea of friendship and the importance of having friends and good friends, it's important that we pay attention that though we may socialize and be friendly with people, we should be careful who has the right to influence us and who has the right to guide our opinions, and who is it that we build a close and proximate relationship with. And this becomes very important for our children. They live in a culture and environment where being friends with people around them is not difficult. If you take anyone and you put them in a place for 40 hours a week, our children are in school 40 hours a week with their friends, with these people who they socialize with, that they spend time with. They build relationships with them. They build connections with them. Our obligation becomes two things. One is that explain to them that these are relationships of convenience. The same thing that we have coworkers that we become friendly with. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a good thing to be friendly with the people that we're known as good, kind people. Very good. But that doesn't mean that this person has the right to influence my actions or has the right to be one of my intimate companions who gives me advice in the affairs of my religion and my life. That is where we come into a problem. Relationships of convenience are those that because we're in the same place constantly together, we go through the same experiences, we build friendship, no problem. To be friendly with them is okay. but not to make them intimate companions. What happens most of the time, especially with our children, which is why this is an important conversation, is that eventually these friends become the advisors to our children. They guide them and tell them how they should deal with their parents, how they should deal with their family, where they should get jobs, where they should apply to schools, and they become an influencer on our children. And this is natural. It is natural, which is why to counteract it, you have to talk to your children first and foremost about who they should make as friends. Educate them and explain to them the importance of Iman in their close and proximate friends. And the other portion of this is that we have the obligation then to facilitate that our children should make friends with those who have our Iman and faith. We give them the environments, the culture, we make the sacrifices to bring them to places where they can find the appropriate friends that they need to have. This becomes our obligation then. If we want our children to be protected on the Day of Judgment, we want to save them from the fire of hell, we want to save them from people who will try to take their good characteristics away from them on the Day of Judgment, then invest time today. And the same is true for us. Be sociable with everyone. Be kind to your neighbors. Be kind with the people you work with. Be familiar. Be helpful to everyone. But the intimate relationship of friendship that our Prophet set amongst the people of Medina, that relationship we want to have with the mu'mineen and those who share our faith and ideology in life. When they counsel us, they understand the priorities that we have in life. When they support us, they understand that who am I answerable to for my actions? What am I hoping to accomplish on the Day of Judgment? If my ultimate goal in life is to go to heaven, then the people who are my friends and companions should be those who are going to help me get to heaven. If I don't have that, then how would it be possible that I don't get lost along the way to where I need to be? These become our obligations of investing, of being focused, that we give our children the correct education of how to invest their friendship. So then how do we become friends for the sake of Allah and people that Allah wants to see as friends? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. There are 2 points that we can make in this. One is, for example, the idea that on the Day of Judgment, those who will be looking to benefit us, Allah describes them in one place that أَخِلَّا يَوْمَئِذٍ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ عَدُوٌّ. But in another place He gives an explanation in Surah Al-Furqan. He explains, he says, يَوْمَئِذٍ يُعِذُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعْ رَسُولِ السَّبِيلَ. In the 27th verse of the 25th surah, Allah is giving an explanation. He says, on the Day of Judgment, that the oppressor, the zalim, will be someone who will bite at his hands in frustration and say, I wish I had followed the path of Rasulullah. Our Mufassirin explain that the person who is the zalim, who will bite at his hands and complain and wish that I had followed the path of Rasulullah, will be those people who had found Islam and were on the religion of Islam and were led away from the path of the Prophet. Ya waylata laytani attakhidhtu fulanan khalila. Lam attakhidh fulanan khalila. This second verse, the 28th verse of the surah, explains and elaborates why we know that the oppressor who will say, I wish I was with the Prophet, was a Muslim, a mu'min who got led away. Because in the 28th verse, on that day, this oppressor will complain, woe is me, I wish I had not taken fulanan, so-and-so, as a friend of mine. لَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنِ الذِّكْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. That person led me away from the reminder and the path of the Prophet after I had found the path of guidance. So meaning that we too will suffer this. This will be a difficulty for us. This will be a problem that we can pay attention to now and correct. Inna kana shaytana lil insani khudula. That shaitan is someone who misleads and avoids the support of the Muslimin, of the mu'mineen. This is an important factor for us that we should pay attention to, that we don't wind up in a situation that we will be in a state of regret in that moment. But the idea that, for example, this friendship is important and how to be a good friend, we can take a look and see that Allah Himself has given the designation of friend to Nabi Ibrahim. Nabi Ibrahim is known as Khalilullah. So meaning that if there is an attribute of friendship that we should be looking for, if there is a characteristic of friendship that we want to develop, how do we find out that how do I become a friend such that I possess the attributes of Khalilullah, the friend of Allah in my life? Even this, we have the explanation of how to become this friend, such a friend that Allah is pleased with us. We'll name 3 attributes of Nabi Ibrahim that are beneficial. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. These 3 attributes, our Holy Prophet, when explaining why was Ibrahim known as Khalil, he lists over 5 or 6 attributes, but there are 3 that come with repetition. One is that Ibrahim was someone who helped the people who were in need. That whenever there was someone who was a needy person, he would help them, including feeding people. Our Prophet Ibrahim was such a person that he knew that Allah liked that you should eat with a friend, that he would stand on the road. He built his house by a crossroads, a traveling road where people would pass. And when the time for a meal would come, Nabi Ibrahim would stand outside on the road and invite people to sit and eat with him, such that he ate with the creation of Allah and spent time with them. Helping people and inviting them to eat and sharing generosity was one of the attributes of Nabi Ibrahim that Allah loved. 2 was the frequent dhikr of Allah and the remembrance of Allah. That it was something that was common for him, that he would always be remembering Allah and worshipping Allah. The 3rd point is that he relied on no one but Allah for assistance in any affair. This point is the one that I see the most emphasis around, that I share with you. That Ibrahim became the friend of Allah when whatever difficulty befell him, he never looked for people to assist him. Whether we take a look and we see in an instance where Nabi Ibrahim left Bibi Sarah to go find wheat, to find flour to make bread. When he went to go buy this wheat and flour, he could not find the person he was looking for to sell it to him. So when he returned back, he was empty-handed. But he did not want to turn and ask anyone and beg anyone for assistance in this situation. He says, I have no wasila, only Allah I return. When he came close to the house, he was embarrassed that I should come to the house with empty bags when I left with the desire of bringing back flour into my house. So they said that Nabi Ibrahim took sand and filled it into the bags, so that at least when he would enter the house, there would be hope in the eyes of Sarah. So he came into the house and he brought the bag and he placed it on the floor, and he went to go pray out of embarrassment that she should open the bag and see what's inside. When he finished his prayer, when he finished his ibadat and he comes back, he sees that bread has been made for him and put in front of him. He says, Sarah, where did this bread come from? She says, it came from that flour that you just brought with you. And Ibrahim thanks Allah that, oh Allah, I was embarrassed to go to her empty-handed. You turned the sand in these bags into flour for us to make bread. Unfortunately, Allah didn't turn the sand into sugar today. Huh? For those who were here earlier, you can learn about what happened earlier. Another example is the idea when Nimrud wanted to throw Ibrahim into the fire. That fire, you have to understand that Nimrud wanted to throw Nabi Ibrahim into, was such a hot fire that they said that a bird flying over that fire would die from the heat of the fire. The idea of how hot this fire was that they said we have no way of entering Ibrahim into the fire. If we walk him to the fire, he'll die from the heat of the fire before he gets burned by it. So what did they decide to do? They built a catapult to throw him into the fire. Because they said we want to put him in the fire and punish him for the fact that he killed our gods. But there was no way of getting him there. When he is loaded into this cannon, when he is loaded into this catapult, he is about to be thrown in, the malaika come to Ibrahim. And they say, first one who comes, he says, oh Prophet of Allah, if you allow me, my wings will put out the flames that are about to burn you. Ibrahim said, I don't want this from you. Another angel comes and he says, oh Prophet of Allah, if you allow me, I will take you and I will fly you far away from here. Ibrahim says, I don't want it. They said, oh Prophet of Allah, what are you waiting for then? He says, I am only counting on the help of Allah to assist me even in this difficulty. That I am not counting on anyone other than that Lord who created me that will save me from even this condition. Which is why we take a look and we see the mu'jiza of Ibrahim in this condition is that Allah didn't let him down. Allah instead changed the rules of reality and existence to preserve his friend, because his friend only counted on Allah. So for us, when we build friendships, don't look at what this person can do for me. Don't build a friendship on the basis of how beneficial this person is to me. No, our goal in friendship is that we build friendships on the basis that both of us possess the love of Allah and both of us rely on Allah for assistance to us. Rather than to say that this is a beneficial friendship to me. There is business benefit, there is this benefit, there is social benefit. Look and see that if this is a person who loves Allah, then this is a person who I want to build a relationship with and a friendship in my life. And that all of my relationships are built only for the sake of Allah. That premise is something we have to educate in our children. We have to teach and we have to remind ourselves that these are the basis that we want to build our relationships on. Which is why one of the longest and best relationships we can build in our life is those relationships built around faith. Why? Because whether I'm 6 or 60, my faith will be the same the entire life. That friendship that I build on the fundamental of faith will always bring me back to Allah and will bring me back to Islam. Whether I'm 6, I come to the masjid, I come to the majlis of Aba Abdullah. Whether I'm 30, 40, 50, whenever I come back, I will see the same people in this place. I will find those same relationships in this place that for my life, my entire life, as long as I love this Ahlul Bayt and the other person loves this Ahlul Bayt, we'll see each other forever. And we'll always be connected. And I will always know how to find this person. That even if I lose them in the world, when I come to the majlis of Aba Abdullah, I will find them again. This is one of the most beautiful relations and the purest ones that we have. It's not just, for example, fear of the Day of Judgment, but the beauty that we keep each other together. In the famous statement, حُبِّ الْحُسَيْنِ جَمَعْنَا, that the love of Imam al-Hussein is what brings us together. No matter where we are, this majlis is open to all of us. We come all together to remember this majlis and these masa'ib. These masa'ib, these difficulties are what the Ahlul Bayt gave us as an inheritance to protect us from the plots of the enemies and the dangers of this life. That no one else will understand the crying for Aba Abdullah than one who loves Aba Abdullah. This crying is what Imam Zainul Abidin wept for 34 years. 34 years he wept. To the extent where Abu Hamza, when he comes to him and he says, "Are you still going to cry? This قَتَلَكُمْ عَادَ وَشَرَّفَكُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَهَادَ." Oh Imam Zainul Abidin, in your family history, to be killed is normal. It is something that has happened to you for generations. And that shahadat is something that is an honor that Allah has granted to you and your family. Imam Zainul Abidin replies to him, "Oh Abu Hamza, it's true, shahada is our honor from Allah. To be killed is something normal for our family. But oh Abu Hamza, where is it normal that our women should be paraded in the streets of Kufa and Sham? Oh Abu Hamza, where is it said that it is appropriate that our father's head was paraded on a spear in the middle of the markets? That our children were killed? That our brothers were slaughtered before our eyes? How was this an example of shahada and an honor?" He said, "Oh Abu Hamza, Yaqub had 12 sons. He lost one. He wept until his eyes were blind from crying. Oh Abu Hamza, I have witnessed 18 members of my family killed in front of me. How is this an honor for us?" These are the days after the event of Arba'een, where the Ahlul Bayt returned to the city of Medina. This majlis that we hold, we didn't start this tradition. Our Imam began this tradition. Look, when Imam Zainul Abidin comes to the city of Medina, Bishr was a companion who was with them there. He says to Bishr, he says, "Oh Bishr, your father was a poet. Are you a poet as well?" Bishr says, "Yes, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, I too can recite poetry." He says, "Bishr, go into the city of Medina and let the people know that we have returned." Imam Zainul Abidin built a tent outside of the city of Medina and prepared a place for majlis there. and invited the people through the poetry of Bishr. When Bishr enters the city of Medina, he calls out, "O residents of Medina, where do you reside now? When Hussein, the truest resident of this town, was killed. His son and his women have returned and wait for you outside of Medina. Go and pay to them your respects." He said that on hearing of these statements, the city of Medina began to empty towards this tent outside. But he makes one statement. He says that as I was exiting, I saw a woman who was known as al-Banin approach me. She said, "Oh Bishr, you bring news. What news have you brought of my Hussein?" Bishr replied, "A'zam Allah laki al-ajar bi ibniki Uthman ya al-Banin. I give you sad tidings of the killing of your son Uthman." She says, "I did not ask you about him, I asked you about my son Hussein." He says, "And I give you sad tidings of the killing of your son Ja'far." She says, "Don't speak to me of Ja'far, tell me of my son." al-Banin, who is known as the mother of sons, if she is to ask about the son that she wants to talk about, it is this Hussein. She says, "Don't tell me of Ja'far." He speaks of Abdullah. She says, "I did not ask you of Abdullah, but when he says, I give you sad tidings of the killing of your son Abbas," then al-Banin stops for a moment. If there is no Abbas, then I know that my Hussein has not returned to me. When the people exited the city, they found a tent. And they said that an old man came out of this tent and a servant came and brought him a chair. And he began to speak to us, but we said to him, "We did not come to see you, we have come to see the son of Hussein, Zainul Abidin." He said, "Oh people, don't you recognize me? I am Ali ibn al-Hussein. I am Zainul Abidin." We cried out in pain, "O grandson of the Prophet, when you left us, you were a young man. You are one whose strength we were proud of. You come back to us, your hair has turned white. Your back is bent. You sit on a chair like an old man." He complained and he began the majlis of Abu Abdullah. "O people of Medina, if you would have seen how they killed my father thirsty and hungry. You did not witness my brother Akbar in the sands of Karbala. You did not see the body of Qasim trampled by horses. You did not see the body of Asghar raised on a spear." The majlis of Abu Abdullah was began by Imam Zainul Abidin, that, "O people, know that the masa'ib that befell us were not just that we were killed, but that we were killed in a way that no one deserves to be killed. We were paraded through streets as if we were not the grandchildren of Rasulullah, but that we were the enemies of Islam." ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. We raise our hands in dua with tears in our eyes. Ya Allah, 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 Ya Mahmud bihaqqi Muhammad, Ya A'la bihaqqi Ali, Ya Fatir as-samawat bihaqqi Fatima, Ya Muhsin bihaqqi al-Hasan, Ya Qadim al-Ahsan bihaqqi al-Hussein. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to the marhumin of the sponsor of this majlis and all those who are present. Ya Allah, forgive our sins, cover our flaws. Ya Allah, those amongst our family, our community, the mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease, Ya Allah, give shifa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. And those amongst the mu'mineen who are suffering through insecurity and threat and danger, whether they be in Afghanistan, Pakistan, in any nation of the world, Ya Allah, give security and protection to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, keep our children on the upright religion of Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman and entitle us to the shafa of Imam al-Hussein in dunya and in akhirah. Matam Hussein.
Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein,
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین. اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا نہ بھول سکے گا تجھے تا حشر زمانہ، اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں، اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار. اٹھتی نہیں بابا سے تیری لاش علی اکبر، اٹھتی نہیں بابا سے تیری لاش علی اکبر، تھا تو نے تو بیٹا میری میت کو اٹھانا، اے غیرت مریم اے غیرت مریم. کیوں زینب و کلثوم کی چھنتی ہے ردائیں، کیوں زینب و کلثوم کی چھنتی ہے ردائیں، جاؤ ارے لوگو میرے غازی کو بلانا، اے غیرت مریم اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا. جس در پہ سلامی دیا کرتے تھے پیمبر، جس در پہ سلامی دیا کرتے تھے پیمبر، ٹھہرو اے مسلمانوں وہی گھر نہ جلانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار. تو دختر زہرا ہے نواسی ہے نبی کی، تو دختر زہرا ہے نواسی ہے نبی کی، بازار میں سرننگے تیرا خطبہ سنانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار. نیند آئے بھلا کیسے سکینہ کو زمیں پر، نیند آئے بھلا کیسے سکینہ کو زمیں پر، تو نے ہی سکھایا اسے سینے پہ سلانا، اے غیرت مریم تیرا اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا، اے دختر حیدر وہ قیامت کی گھڑی تھی، اے دختر حیدر وہ قیامت کی گھڑی تھی، سر ننگے تیرا شام کے دربار میں جانا ہے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا ہے غیرت تیرا بازار میں جانا ہے غیرت مریم مر جاتے ہیں شوہر تو پناہ دیتے ہیں بھائی مر جاتے ہیں شوہر تو پناہ دیتے ہیں بھائی کبرا کہاں جائے نہ رہا کوئی ٹھکانہ اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا اے غیرت مریم تیرا بازار میں جانا
جنگل میں بھرے گھر کو لوٹا آئی ہے زینب اے شہر مدینہ جنگل میں
بھرے گھر کو لوٹا آئی ہے زینب اے شہر مدینہ
عابد کو کسی طرح بچا لائی ہے زینب اے شہر مدینہ
جنگل میں بھرے گھر کو لوٹا آئی ہے زینب اے شہر مدینہ
ہے بندوا کے رسن ہاتھوں میں اور خطبے سنا کے گھر بار لٹا کے اے دیوار بڑے کفر کے ڈھا آئی ہے زینب ہے جس شہر میں شہزادیوں کی طرح رہے تھے نازوں سے پلے تھے ہے سر ننگے اسی شہر میں ہو آئی ہے زینب ہے جو ہجر پدر میں رہی ہر وقت پریشان سوئی نہیں ایک آن ہے اس بچی کو زندہ میں سلا آئی ہے زینب اے 6 ماہ کے اصغر کو بھی جھولے کے بجائے دکھ درد چھپائے اے آغوش میں تربت کے صلح آئی ہے زینب تھے اون محمد جو میری آنکھوں کے تارے मामू के दुलारे, हाय कुर्बानी है भाई पे कर आई है ज़ैनब। है मंजर वो भुला सकती नहीं कदम आखिर है कहने से कासिर, है जो शाम के दरबार में देखाई है ज़ैनब। या हुसैन, 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 हुसैन,
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله وخاتم النبيين، السلام عليك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين الشهيد بكربلاء، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا تسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين، وجعفر بن محمد الصادق، وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم، وعلي بن موسى الرضا، ومحمد بن علي الجواد، وعلي بن محمد الهادي، والحسن بن علي العسكري، وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك، وجعلنا من أعوانك والأنصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
اللهم صل على محمد آل محمد. Mu'minin, we will not